Hi, I'm Carrie Basas. I'm the director of the Governor's Office of the Education Ombuds. I'm really grateful today to be joined by two wonderful panelists who are parents and also support family engagement through their community work. Adana and Manu have a lot to bring to this conversation, and I'll focus on them today. I did want to briefly share that we are an office of 7 who helps families and schools resolve conflicts and remove barriers for students so that they can fully participate in Washington's K-12 public education system. So part of our work looks like casework for families, and then we also provide outreach and trainings and participate in statewide policy committees where we can bring the experiences of families and students to that setting. Today, we're really going to focus on the stories of the families on the panel and use that as a jumping off point for general best practices. You'll find slides for this webinar on our website, oeo.wa, so oeo.wa.gov. You'll also find the recording of this video there as well as on YouTube where we put it. And you'll see that at the end of this video, we have a link to a survey. We want to know what we can provide in the future that would be of use. Thanks again for joining us. The first question that I will present to the panelists is what family engagement really looks like for them.
Yeah, I think the key thing is, again, just the difference.
Yeah.
You know, difference across, it's not just within family, it's within families as well,
Yeah.
generationally, you know, because, and again, just trying to understand the differences in our communities. Yeah. It's not just mum and dad and 2.4 kids. Yeah. There might be grandparents, there might be aunts, there might be family friends who are all part of this caring community that helps raise this child. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the systems we have around the schools at the moment don't easily deal with people who aren't the two biological parents as the carers. And so that's part of this issue of how do we create spaces where people feel that they can communicate and are heard in the way that they're communicating, because often we miss. I mean, I find that a lot in terms of my own culture with PI. It's very difficult to raise a situation of conflict. There are lots of subtle ways that you do it, which means that you don't get noticed by teachers. And unfortunately, our kids learn that because that's how we interact with them. So when they go to school, their voices are often not silenced, but it's harder to be heard because they're doing all the things they're meant to be doing to be respectful and to be heard by others, but it's just literally not seen. And it's hard to explain to the kids how you need to change in a different space. And this is how you communicate here. And so, I mean, that's the beauty of what we're doing today is we need the schools to be also part of this ongoing dialogue, this conversation about how do we allow you to hear our voices better?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the work of our office is with that disconnect and communication. Sometimes it's in helping both sides understand they may have very similar goals or values, but they're not being communicated in the same way. Other times it's trying to figure out how do we recenter on students because maybe adults have been communicating and what has been happening to the students in the meantime. So that's really powerful, thinking about a feeling and values, thinking about the values that we bring to the conversation, how that looks different culturally. And so that's a good segue into what does it mean for a school to be responsive to you and to your children? What does that look like when you think about aspects of your identity, your student and your students, your child's identity? What does that mean?
Sure. I went first last time.
Oh, sure. Okay.
You laughed, you get to go next.
Well, again, it's almost, I mean, Dana sort of talked about it in terms of like the texting. Having multiple channels. I mean, again, part of it is just the lived reality of our communities and the types of jobs that they have, which might mean very long shifts, which means that it's hard for them to pop in after school. That's just not a reality. And so having, you know, things where there is face-to-face, but also other options, but also just a simple reply, sometimes just saying, you know, reaching out proactively and saying, let's arrange a time to catch up. over the next few weeks. You know, allowing lots of space around that to allow it to develop. Because in my own experience, not just with different communities, but different individuals with communities, some are very happy to be very loud and very, very open about it. Others, you need to work with them, not to coax them out, but just to allow whatever happened to happen. And that, again, doesn't fit very well with our systems at the moment, where I've got to mark off that I talk to these people because maybe they don't feel ready yet to communicate in a way that you get, that you can mark off. But in a sense, that is a communication that's saying that things seem to be solid. You know, having ability to pick that up.
I think that's really true. I also think a lot about exactly that same issue about creating opportunities for families to participate in the school setting outside of traditional working hours. If they, I don't know how many times I've been frustrated about feeling I can't chaperone a field trip, or I can't volunteer in the classroom because mom's got a job. So how else can I be involved in the school community? Can you create some options for me that work outside of this like 9 to 3 kind of window of time? I think it's also important for educators and administrators to be asking families what they need and to not judge the answer, and to be willing to give it. Like, don't ask me that question if you're not willing to follow through on whatever that is, and whether that's a steady source of food for a family who's experiencing food insecurity, or if it's something like a reminder phone call when it's time to get up in the morning to get to school. Like it could be any number of things depending on what their situation is. And so creating that space again of trust, where a family can say, I need this for things to work well, and feel like I'm not going to be judged for needing it, I think is a really big thing. And then the last one I think is just really acknowledging that words matter, and to kind of mirror back to families the sort of language that they use to talk about themselves and to talk about their situations. So I think about like my son, Langston, I describe him as a kid with a disability or a kid who's disabled. I describe him as autistic. I choose those words on purpose because that's informed by our values and by members of the disability community who said, this is the language we prefer. We don't want to use euphemistic language for him. And so I really prefer it when teachers listen to that and repeat that back in the way that they talk about and to my son, because that tells me that they're really modeling, like they're with us in this. They see our values, they're validating our values, and they're modeling the language that we choose for our family.
Yeah, and that's so critical. I'm just even taking those cues as you're talking about in the conversation. What concerns are families feeling that they want responded to? And then what is important to them? We were just at an ADR conference as part of our office. And one of the tips, which was so powerful to me, and I've been doing this work for a while, is what's the sequencing of what people give us? Because not for everyone, not all the time, but you can see the different priorities in the conversation. Sometimes conversations are just kind of fun, or there's polite talk warming up to that. But how are people triaging the issues? How are they talking about things? And so really being seen for all of the values of the family. We talk in our office a lot about, and we will provide the slides at the end as well, and they'll be uploaded to the website. We talk about some tips for communication, which is about being friendly and business-like, and organizing information, considering the outside information you have, whether your child went to a place like the play garden or they're getting outside support from a therapist of some kind. We often see parents really benefit from giving and requesting documentation, whatever documentation they feel comfortable asking for, and also documenting some of those important discussions in writing, even to just check in. We had this 2-hour meeting. It was this whole slog. What did I get out of it? Because that's where we see some of the communication disconnect can happen. And then action steps. So many times we have conversations that may be uncomfortable, but really important, and it can make our head spin, right? So what are the adults gonna do after that? How is it gonna look different? What was good? What are we gonna keep going with? I want to think about, are there any tips that you would add when it comes to communication? Either how you want to receive that communication, you start to talk a little bit about that, or other specifics you would share with educators or families that have been really helpful to you?
I think especially in the beginning, transparency is hugely important. And so I always love hearing the why behind any kind of a decision. I think it's respectful, and it also just helps me understand how this other person has come to their conclusion. And so then we know like where we can go next. And I think that's a two-way street, right? Like maybe I might have a why for my son's teacher, but like, okay, we've decided we're going to do speech therapy on Wednesday afternoons and he's going to have to leave school early. And this is why we made that call. Or maybe it's a school administrator or a teacher saying, we can't give you this accommodation that you're asking for, or we need to arrange a schedule this way or whatever. And this is why we're doing it, whether that's about allocation of resources, which is always a tricky thing, or a policy or whatever. I think it's so helpful if there's a why that's communicated. And I think also, again, as Manu was saying, just multiple forms of communication and checking in with the family about like what works best for you. Okay, is it best if I put a note in your kid's backpack, or is that going to get lost in the shuffle? Would you rather that I email you twice a week with stuff I want you to know? Do monthly newsletters work? Like what's going to be meaningful for you guys so that I'm not wasting my time and you're getting the information that you need? I think that just really sets everyone up for success. If you can have that conversation at the beginning about like how, like, what do you like? Like, should I start my email with like the 4 things you must know in this one sentence and then leave the fluff for the bottom? Or do you want me to warm up to that? Or just, I think that really helps a lot.
Yeah, and it's so easy, I think, educators are rushed and they can lose perspective too. I just got something a few weeks ago from my daughter's teacher, and they're like, here's some brief information about something. It was a 70-page PDF. So we had the relationship where I could joke with her after, like, I'd hate to see what the not brief information is. But when you think at the end of the day, and I probably even do that professionally sometimes, like, here's some information, just read it. So what in this? What are you expecting me to know from that? Or I know schools use different apps to keep up with parents. For one child, I've got 2 apps going this year. So one I forget to check, or the backpack. I feel like that's an additional source of stress sometimes. My child will not be an accurate reporter about whether something's in the backpack. So there are many things to manage, even when things are going pretty well professionally or other, and then where there's not outside stress or other resource constraints. What about you? What about communication seems to work?
Again, part of that is just being really aware of what the silences might mean too. Because in a sense, we're very active, we're very happy to reach out. As a silence can mean a lot of things. It might not mean you're being ignored. It might mean things aren't quite working quite right. Again, there's knowledge that can be garnered from that silence. And so it's that notion of exactly what Dan was saying, but like carrying on. It's an iterative, ongoing process, because it might change over the course of the interaction as they gain comfort with the teachers. Because again, a lot of our communities, particularly our immigrant communities, a teacher and the school is a very important institution, and it's something that they may not feel very comfortable interacting with. It's still a very new part of America that they're getting used to, and the concept that they can ask a teacher to do something is still new. So there's this notion of, in a sense, the schools really need to, within times of transfer, of course, because we're all overrushed, is trying to be as proactive as possible around that, not just in terms of types of avenues, but coming up with alternatives, because you might ask them, is this the best way forward? And hear nothing. And so it's unfortunately almost on this case of the school to try and be proactive about that. There is something in there, and that silence means something. But therein lies the issue. How do we get this out? How do we help surface this in a way? Because once you've got that, and people have figured out how to communicate, in my experience, it flows wonderfully. But sometimes figuring that out is the hardest part of the whole process.
With multiple teachers, if your child is in special ed, for example, having another teacher and other specialists in the mix, then the transitions every year, because you have new adults coming together to support this student. And to the extent, I know same handling instructions for some of the teachers that my daughter has. So do they check email, or are they going to check the app more? Are they someone who would like a phone call, a note, something like that? And so just understanding, and also understanding what the lags might mean or where they are. So I want to talk a little bit about that, about the issue of disability. And you raised that earlier, Adana. We talked a bit about the need to see some of the same documentation that the team is working for, understanding the why. It comes up in our casework with sharing concerns and observations, hopes for your child, because so much of the sports conversation can be very deficits oriented because of the nature of the legal process and then the time constraints. People are coming to address needs. And then really supporting and asking those questions, asking again, checking in. So what has been helpful for you when you think about being a parent of a child with disabilities to having that clear communication? Are there other things?
Oh, geez. We could do a whole webinar.
It's true. I know. Sorry, I mushed everything together in 55 minutes or less. I know. We're going to make a pizza, too, at the end.
Totally. I think one of the things, I talked a little bit about this at the beginning, about the notion of, for me, effective engagement really means like this kind of team mentality. And I bump into this more with people from the medical field than I do with educators, but it happens there, too, so I'll bring it up, which is this idea that people have different areas of expertise, right? And so you've got maybe an educator with a master's degree, you've got an occupational therapist at the table for your IEP meeting, or a special ed teacher, or any number of, I mean, with Langston, we've got a lot of acronyms and things we get to play with, lots of letters. And so sometimes, because time is short, the experts at the table can sometimes feel like, I just want you to listen to me. I know this stuff. I have a PhD. I've got this all figured out. Like, we've got an hour to hash out this IEP. Let's go. And what I often have to say is, I want to mitigate the learning curve for my kid. And I want you to understand that you're an expert in your field, but I'm an expert in my child. And so if we can all come at this from the place of, we're all respective experts in our field. I have a PhD in Langston and his particular version of autism. Not all kinds of autism, but I've got his figured out, I think, today. Ask me again tomorrow.
It's parenting though, right? You have a child and you have a child who has autism.
Exactly.
So he's going to keep changing day to day.
Always. Full of surprises, never a dull moment. And so I think just really that when we can all enter the conversation from this place of mutual respect of everybody's expertise, it works better for the child. And there, you can't really, especially with special ed, there is no one size fits all kind of approach. You can't say, I always do this with cerebral palsy, or I always do this with Down syndrome. It's just not going to work that way.
No. It would be nice if it were that simple, but it's not.
No, it's not.
It's not. And I think that individual response, being dynamic, being interactive about it is so important. And that helps to build additional trust when things aren't going well. And you're like, we're just trying this. There's so much professional language too. I'm reminded of what you're talking about with doctors, specialists. I just think even in state government, right, we talk in acronyms. So we all have our language around things. And sometimes it's hard to wade through that too.
It really is. And I think it also removes a lot of pressure from the providers at the table if they know that they can defer to the family. And if you can say, hey, we're having this challenge, what's worked best for you at home with trying to unpack this particular issue? You can really lean on that and glean the family's wisdom that way, because they're living it every day. And rather than try to reinvent the wheel all the time.
Yeah, and that's so important. And so sometimes parents will contact our office and ask, well, what is special education supposed to look like? So it's that team approach you talked about earlier for all students. That team approach is so important. The parent and student participation, what you were just saying about having a PhD in Langston, as he evolves each day and changes. I mean, children are moving targets, right? That individualization, really being responsive, and around specially designed instruction, because that's the heart of special education and the individual education plan. And then thinking about least restrictive environment, because inclusion is so important. Meeting the educational needs and challenges, the stimulation of children is so important, and making sure that this is part of what leads to a free and appropriate public education. Without those things in the mix, we don't have all of it.
Exactly.
So over half of the cases that come to our office involve students with disabilities. We have another chunk of cases that involve attendance and discipline. This year, over 20% of our cases involve harassment, intimidation, and bullying. So it's a real mix. We're seeing different issues pop up in schools. And as you know, as parents, having gone through the school process with your children, continuing to do that, conflict happens. We were just talking about culturally how conflict might not sit well or be received in a different way, or unease, disease about conflict might manifest in different communication or silence too. So how have you dealt with conflict at school? And so what do you suggest to other parents and educators in dealing with conflict?
Sure. Do you want to chime in, or should I?
Everything great.
Sounds like you have something there.
A little. Unfortunately, I have some practice.
I
you too.
Yeah. Luckily for me, I have not had a ton of conflict with my kids in school, but I do have just life experience from myself as a student, and from the little bit that I've had with my children, and from my position in administration at a school. So I think for me, the first thing is that I always try to approach conflict from a place of curiosity and concern rather than a place of defensiveness. Like help me understand how we got here and what the real issues are, because that just leaves you a lot more room to maneuver. I mean, sometimes it's a really clear black and white, like something really big and bad happened or somebody really messed up. But I think so often it's like this slow building of miscommunication or some missed cues or something that's just really misunderstood. And so if we can breathe for a minute, like call your best girlfriend and complain about it, like vent first and then send your email. Right. And approach it from this place of like, I would really love to understand this a little bit better. I just don't get it. Can you help me address this confusion that I have? I think that's a big helpful first step. I think, especially if the parents and the parents or caregivers, whomever is caring for this child, and the school have developed a pretty solid relationship of trust from the beginning, there's also going to be a lot more room and breadth with which to try to resolve a conflict. If you've done that legwork ahead of time, you kind of trust each other. I really love my son's teacher's approach, which is to, and I feel like I'm talking about him all the time and not my daughter, but just to send us an email or send us a text and say, this thing happened, and do you have some insight into why he might be acting this way? Or is there some kind of trigger? Is there something going on at home? Is there something that can help me understand this a little bit better? That kind of proactive communication that you talked about before something gets really big, if we can talk about it while it's small, when it's much more manageable and it doesn't feel so intractable. And lastly, I think a big one for me is trying to make sure that we all have the same goals at the table. Because I feel like when your goals are not in alignment, then it's going to be much harder to resolve a conflict. Because if we're all trying to accomplish different things, that's just inherently not going to work.
No, and the students in that tug of war in between. But what I took from what you were saying too is just having your child and your children be seen. I know that's important for me as a parent. And so communicating like, hey, I'm concerned, checking in.
Exactly.
No, again, it's that notion of really, really focusing in a proactive way to work with family and to work with our kids. Because too often, and back to what Adana was talking about before, particularly like a medical model where they're coming in, they're going to treat you.
They're going to fix you.
They're going to fix you. And same with education sometimes. It's easy enough to fall into that, particularly when we're constrained by time and money, etc. It's like, oh, I've done this before, this is how we do it. But every case is a little bit different. And even though you might do that, it doesn't take much more to really ask and really engage with, because that's where the goodness, if you will, of that interaction is, of someone actually feeling, as you say, heard, seen, both our kids and ourselves as families. And as ourselves also as professionals in the field, in terms of, like, we have to check ourselves too to make sure that we're not going, oh, it's this. Really spend the time. And again, that's where the proof in the pudding is almost. Back to, again, what Adana was saying, that conflicts very rarely just, is it something that happened once in a very large, very black and white way. It's an addition over time of multiple small things. So getting in front of it, if possible, again, through this notion of really engaging with, checking in to find out. But then when things do, again, following up with what Adana was saying, this notion of how you phrase that. I was wondering if you have some insight about, the phrasing is really, really important, because unfortunately around the world in so many cultures, conflict does tend to be something that we automatically go into defensive posture. And while we talk about being curious and open, it's really hard because we have decades of experience of it not being that. And so it's something we really have to work hard to do. And it's not easy. It's not easy at all.
No.
It can be a space of wonderful growth, but it's painful moving through.
They call them growing pains for a reason, right?
Yeah, no, totally.
I think you're talking about all of my human relationships, really. And this is marriage advice for people and making friends, and keeping friends, business associates, whatever it is, right? So, and we see that in our office. I think about my ombuds. My ombuds react because of their own personal experiences to conflict in different ways. Yeah. Sometimes it's easier navigating certain conflicts than others, even as impartial folks, because we're all human. And so it's good, as you were saying, professionally, to step back and say, what am I reacting to here? What is my wish for this? But what is the hope of the people who have brought this issue to me to resolve? So, I think that's the good thing about having our team in a small community to check in, because that's the heart of our work with conflict. So people, as you were both saying too, people approach conflict in different ways, whether it's you go and hide in the basement or you're just in it, like, bring it flamethrower. Yeah. Let's just do it till we resolve this. We can talk about mothers too on this one. That will be step 2. Yeah. So we all want a positive meeting. So some of the tips that we give are listen and share in equal parts. And think about that. At the mediators conference, they were talking about the role of a mediator is really to listen 80% of the time and talk 20%. But as equals in this process with families and schools, we want to try to find some balance and acknowledging concerns. And that can include pausing. I think we've talked about this. Pausing is not necessarily a bad thing. It means that you can be processing. You were talking about pausing, connecting with a girlfriend, waiting till the next morning to send that email, because email is one of those things where we can just react and go for it. And, how it's hard to keep the discussion on track sometimes. And that's where bringing someone else into the discussion can be helpful. And just even if it's between the family and teacher, family, principal, the IEP team, trying to go back to exploring options. What are the options here, rather than being stuck historically in what hasn't worked? Where are we going forward? And then looking for those opportunities, like you were saying about expert status as a parent, to learn more, fill in gaps. What is this perspective this other person has? And our list, which you've already covered, is trying to identify the why, because we can attribute a lot of bad intent to someone else, whether it's through silence or whether it's through this engagement, which seems weird to us. And then sharing those outside perspectives where we can, which might help, the conversations that have been circling to get unstuck. Here's what the occupational therapist thinks. Here is what we've been trying to preserve by enrolling our child in language schools. You may hear them speaking in another language in the classroom. We want to encourage that. So those sorts of things. Here's what we have done to create a better peer support group for our child. Here are the supports that we're getting from a refugee group or this nonprofit that works with families and does family support groups. So all those things that maybe help provide additional perspectives and data points, even though you're not going to have all those people at the table. So conflict too, part of the issue is, and we talked a bit about this, is it can be really emotional. And so is there more that you would add on what you do with those emotions when they come up? Because they're going to be there. We're not robots. Right. And this is our baby, right? These are our babies. If you're going to get worked up, that's the thing you're going to get worked up about as a parent. So what do you do with those emotions personally in terms of self-care, or how do you support others in dealing with the emotions of that?
So I'll get pissed this time. Or Adana doesn't have to do it all the time. I think part of it is just like honoring that. Like what you feel is what you feel. Because all too often we do try to push it down or get past that, and it's a process, and the process takes as long as the process takes. And that's a way healthier way to deal with emotions. And then the other thing actually is part of that also is that teachers are people too. And that the emotions that they feel, they're valid as well. And what we need to do is try and find a space where we can come to an agreement of how to best move forward together. Again, back to this notion of with. Because often these things are often seen as technical fixes. Oh, well, your kid needs to do this, this, and this, and then they'll be fine. And we put so much on this particular event rather than thinking that it's a journey that we're on together. And it's good that we're navigating and managing this well, but there's a lot we've done together before, and there's a lot we're going to have to do later. And so this notion of being proactive, but of, you know, how do we keep on this journey well, and that conflict about how do we move forward from here? Do we go right or left? That's just part of any relationship, because again, this is part of the thing that your child and our as families' relationship to these organizations. It's a relationship. It's a relationship, and we have to navigate that together.
We need that to be functional, because you're going to have a child in school for a long time. So if this is happening even with just a particular person in elementary school, what are the skills that we take away from that, the experiences and lessons to try to make it better the next time, you know, whether it's our role in that or thinking about what didn't the other person do that I would have needed to have my goals and feelings met and feel heard. So what have you done for the emotional aspect?
Well, I'm a big fan of a long walk.
That's a good idea.
I think just gotta work it out. I love what Moni said about like it really acknowledging that your feelings are there and that they're true for you. You know, I think you can lose a lot of time and energy trying to minimize those feelings or pretend they're not happening or turn it into something else. And it's so helpful and healthy, I think, to be able to look at it and say, I'm pissed right now, and I need to just own that I'm really angry and process that before I can get to solution building. I just need to like rage for a minute or be sad or whatever it is that you are feeling. I think on both sides of the equation, especially when the teacher and the family are on, or people have just very different identities, whether that's in terms of race or wealth or gender or ability, to be really aware of the lens through which you're looking at this conflict. Like I'm looking at, I can't stop being a woman. I can't stop being brown. That's not going to stop for me. And so just knowing that that's there, and same thing for the teacher in this scenario, you know, if they're like being aware of all of the identities that you hold and any associated power or privilege or marginalization that come with them. Just sort of like aware of how much space you're taking in the room, how much weight you're communicating to people with your words and your actions, so that everyone can kind of tread lightly around each other, I think is huge, that piece of self-awareness. I'm a big fan of, you know, kind of, I talked earlier about call a good girlfriend and write your email. Like I like to write something out. I'm kind of a slow thinker. I need to write it down and step away from a minute and come back and look at it again and be like, okay, is this how I want to present myself in this scenario? Is this what I want to model for my kid when he sees me navigating some conflict or she sees me navigating some conflict? Like, what do I want my child to observe happening right now? And how can I get myself to that place where I'm in alignment with what I want them to be seeing? And if that's, I need to just email the teacher and say, I'm really upset. Can we talk about this in 2 days instead of tomorrow? Or whether that's saying we need to talk right now, or like whatever's going to work for you in that scenario, but just sort of being really aware of who you are and where you are, I think really helps a lot.
Yeah, and how those outside forces fit into it. You know, I could get into a pattern of rapid fire email with a teacher too, and you're like, well, you know, we've taken this asynchronous communication to a synchronous state, but it's not necessarily positive, depending on if I'm tired, my child is distracted, I'm navigating some medical appointments or something with my kids. So how does that fit in? And I think those experiences that you were talking about really play out in our office as well. So we get parents who call who they don't trust that communication or the emotions around it or the relationship around it can be better, because they're concerned that they're the only ones seeing that their child isn't doing well. Sometimes that's just a difference in communication. Sometimes that can be their reality. And then, or they've had a history of not communicating well with other staff. So it's this kind of path of disappointment. So why would it be different? Where is there the possibility for it to be different? And then the pieces of identity that you were talking about. So what do I bring in? What do you bring in? What do you bring into the conversation that's really important? And to what extent is that honored or not at school? And so it really comes back to some of the tips that we share are recentering on the student's experience and then expressing where the concerns are coming from. And sometimes that is doing that stepping back that you were talking about. And then refocusing on the relationship, like you were talking about. Okay, so we're not going to be besties, but we're going to move forward with what this might look like. And so when we give workshops on communicating in difficult situations, we go back to those things that you all were talking about as well. So it's that self-awareness, and then listening to understand, and then really thinking about your interest over positions, because so often communication can get stuck where it's like, this is what I want. Why aren't you giving it to me? And someone else says, well, this is what I can give you, or this is what I want. So this back and forth, are you really going to get the other person to shift in a way? So why is it that you're offering me that? Why is it that you want that? And so that can, in some situations, move people to a greater sense of understanding, make them more open, have more of an inquiry mindset. I want to come back and talk a little bit about special ed too. And we tell people to work on that low.
Before you do that, sorry, just one thing that just flowed on from that. No, I was just thinking, and the other thing to think about is history. So a number of our communities have generationally not done too well in the school system because the school system was not set up for them. And so there's a lot of trauma related to that, and there's like literally multi-generational trauma about what the school does to you. And it's great to talk about the student and how he's interacting, he or she is interacting in the classroom, but there's a lot of other stuff there, and we need to be aware of that. And it's great that we're having conversations like this to begin to change the structures to allow that. But this is the structural equivalent of what we were talking about with the emotions processing. You know, this has taken literally generations to build up. It's going to take some time to unbuild and to move through to build something new together. I think that's part of what we're talking about, like how do we begin that journey again together? And so again, it's just that awareness that there's a lot of history. There's a lot of history, and that the school system actually has been very unhelpful and has built a lot of that history. And that we can undo that. It's something that we can do together. But again, back to the notion of where to start, where we're at.
Yeah, the history of Native boarding schools in Washington State and other places. We think about that too when we talk to families. So their experience being Black in Seattle or anywhere else. Families that have come to the U.S. to work in farms in eastern and central Washington, the extent that there's trust or not. What were their experiences in schools, either from teachers, principals, peers, other families? And so it's natural and human to come into this situation saying, well, you know, this has been my experience. These are my data points. So why should this be different here?
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah,
I think a lot about the way that I manage conflict versus, like, we talked about my mom briefly, and she, my mom is a 6-foot-tall Black lady from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and she was born in 1944. And so her experience with school was one of Jim Crow segregation. And so her, when she came into a position to feel like she needed to advocate for me or any of my siblings, did so from a place of extreme distrust in the school system, and often, and unfortunately more often than not, she was right, understanding that there was probably some racial bias involved in the creating the conflict in the first place, and being unafraid to point that out, which sometimes made people really uncomfortable. And I think it's just so important to have that grounding in history. And for the teaching staff, I mean, 82% of our teachers are white women, and they need to know that and be really aware of what that can mean for their interactions with families who are not made up of white women, right? Like, we just, like, anytime that those identities are not in alignment, really understanding, like, what's the weight of history here, and what am I conveying without intending to? Right? Because
we can get into that interaction. We're like, I'm a good person. Why do I see me as a good person? And it's not so much about you. It's about being more responsive in the school environment, and then thinking, we don't know what we don't know, but we do know where some of our growth edges are and where we can do some of that work. I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions, so I'm going to move through some of this. But, you know, when this comes out for students with disabilities and the lowest level of repair is not exactly happening, things we suggest is, you know, if there's been a decision, get it in writing. Often that can be through the use of the prior written notice. There's more information about that in our special ed section on the website. You can ask if it's a team decision, like around an IEP or 504, ask them to reconsider or postpone a change until you've had a chance to reflect, how to have a better discussion, have enough time for it, get some outside data and perspectives and support. And then sometimes if people can't agree, then think about what's a plan to take data. Okay, we're going to try this strategy, but let's look. We're not committing to it for this year or for years. We're going to come back and revisit part of this conversation within a reasonable amount of time. And then just seeking help and support. So on that theme, before I open it up to questions, final question for you all is, and then I ask you about your vision for the world. So be prepared for that. Who's going up first for that? So which community supports or resources have been helpful to you in this process of navigating the technical part of schools, but just nurturing yourselves as families?
I think most of mine are special ed specific. Because that's where we've needed the most support so far. But Open Doors for Multicultural Families is an incredible nonprofit down in Kent, and they serve families of color of kids with disabilities. They're just great and have incredible resources in terms of translation or just helping you understand this mess that is special education law. I feel like you kind of get dropped into this whole new universe when you have a child who moves into the special education system. And so it's really helpful to have somewhere to go and say, what is an IEP? What does that even stand for? What's a 504 plan? How do I figure this out? The Arc of King County similarly has some really great resources online and in person in terms of getting help with access to all sorts of just kind of Cliff's Notes versions of how to figure out this process. Rights Law is another online resource. Washington Autism Alliance and Advocacy, right? I always forget which A goes in which spot.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, they do a great workshop on navigating special ed law as well, which I found really helpful. And the Southeast Seattle Education Coalition is also really great.
They are really great.
Yeah. So those are all things that I found helpful.
Those are all people we've hung out with in our office too. So those are, except Rights Law, you don't hang out with the website so much in your own time. So not in person.
No, I agree. And I think part of the power of CSEC is actually what it's doing, unlike some of the others, which is providing information or people to talk to about a very specific issue, is the networking aspect of it. That's what's super powerful, because again, it's like, taking what we were talking about with a parent and a teacher and maybe an occupational therapist that are working together. It's the same type of thing. We all have different parts of the puzzle. And so spaces like CSEC are particularly powerful because it allows us to meet and come together with others who are working in similar but not necessarily the same issue. I know I've learned a lot from that and from the people I've met there.
That's great. So one of our attendees asked, who has apps and gets texts from their teachers? They're feeling like they're getting very little communication at school. They have no idea how their student is doing. I manage 2 apps for my daughter's school in Seattle. One I might be called like Remind Me. The other one is Seesaw. So the Remind Me one I ignored, ironically. I didn't know to remind me. Seesaw has been great. Our daughter Dasha is able to, they're releasing salmon today at Carkey. But she's been sending me salmon videos. She takes me pictures of her math work. So they do videos and do pictures. It's been really lovely. It's the first time I've had school use one of those. Usually it's been the parent email newsletter from the parent volunteer. Is there other tech in your lives?
It's a lot of texting at the school that we're in right now, which works really well. Both my husband and I work 2 jobs, so we're almost never in the same place at the same time. And when I talk to her about like that conversation at the beginning of the school year about like what kind of communication is going to work for you, I'm like, and also asking for what you need and hoping that no one judges you. It's, we don't actually get to see each other much. Like that's just the nature of our busy lives right now. And so that's what we've asked for from our teacher. And luckily she has a little bit of bandwidth to be able to do that. But I think it varies so much from school to school and even teacher to teacher within the school.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's school district, school, teacher, varies
Paras,
so much.
whomever happens to be
I mean, we mainly email. Haven't used the app much, but we do have access to an app if we want. But I try not to use the apps because otherwise it's just another thing in there.
I'm also a big fan of like if I have a friend who's got a child in the same class who maybe like is able to volunteer in class more often than I am because of their work schedule, asking them to be a resource as well about like, oh, there was this cute thing that happened today, or here's a picture of Aurelia running on the trail. So whatever. It's just really trying to find some creative ways to get that info, because kids are not always very forthcoming.
No, they aren't, or
Oddly.
don't understand what they're sharing. You know? Like, where did you get that from today? It's kind of funny.
Oh, but also, as you say, and in part of that, though, to the person who's asking the question, I mean, one of the things is you might want to ask the teacher. Say, look, texting is actually a really great way to engage with me. Would you mind if, like, once a week, you know, because I'm missing you, I don't get the chance to see you because of pick up schedules and stuff. If you could text me, really appreciate that. Generally, I can see there's something that teachers would be appreciative of because they want to have an engagement with you, or ask around in terms of school. Does the school have an app? Because maybe the teacher doesn't use it and stuff like that.
Yeah, it'd be great to have greater consistency among the, you know, in the communication as well as in the tech that's being used. Do we have any? We're going to wrap up in about 4 minutes to allow folks to eat some lunch, you know, attend to whatever before 1, get somewhere else. Do we have other questions from anyone? You can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or you can send us a chat. You'll see a chat bubble at the bottom of your screen. Otherwise, while I'm waiting for a question, if there are any, let me ask you all, what's your vision for the world? No. So what are some parting ideas when we're thinking about this conversation? What can we do better to support family and community engagement? What's one takeaway for you, or your hope for what this could look like moving forward?
No pressure.
Small question.
Small question.
This one's for the children. We can start singing that.
You know, I think for me, I really love the idea of if we can all try to work a little bit harder at taking that leap of faith to just begin from a place of belief and trust on both sides, you know, whether that's educators and administrators or kids, and try to, you know, I understand we're all resource poor. That's just kind of the nature of the universe right now. But if the question can be, how can we configure the resources we have to best serve this individual kid, instead of just kind of, this is what we do, and that's just kind of how it has to be. If we can kind of approach these questions from a place of like, how can I make this as equitable as possible, and how can I make this as pleasant and as painless as possible? You know, I think unfortunately, when one of the resources that we're short on is time, we can be brutally efficient at the cost of true inclusion, at the cost of really getting everybody to the table and really hearing what they have to say. And the last thing I would say is I want everyone to abolish the word just from their vocabulary. I cannot tell you how crazy it makes me when people say, well, why don't you just do this, this, or this? I hear that a lot with families. Why don't you just send another email? Why don't you just follow up with the principal? Why don't you just make another phone call? Just if we could all assume that everyone is doing their best, and that if things aren't working out, it's because there's some sort of barrier between this person and the outcome we're wanting, again, on all sides, rather than assuming that someone's falling down on the job. I think we'll all get along a lot better.
Yeah, there's so much shaming in that, right? Even if people don't intend it, they want to be helpful. They just want to be helpful.
You just did the thing,
We're going to move on to just from this podcast.
Yes, it's a 4-letter word.
It is a 4-letter word, but justice is good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, because then just to follow up on one of the questions that's been asked, one of the questions that was asked, and Adana can answer because it flows on, is what's one tip for getting things back on track when things have gone badly?
Oh.
Yes.
That is one of the questions which I'm asking you for our participants.
When things have gone badly. I think it is really helpful for whoever has the bandwidth to do it, to be the person to say, this has gone badly. And we would really like to find a way to get back on track. We would really like like reframing your goal and really coming out and saying, I am, like, even if we completely disagree about what happened or why it happened, if someone is willing to be the person who comes out and says, this really isn't working, and I really want it to work, and can we try something just completely different? Like, can we try this a completely different way? I think is so helpful to just have that person who's willing to acknowledge that things have fallen apart, and extend that kind of little olive branch of let's try to find let's carve out a little space, just this tiny little bubble where the external forces don't exist, where we can just be people who are trying to solve a problem without so much weight, I think. can be really helpful.
I think so too. And some of our ombuds suggest, bringing it back to the student. So whether you bring a picture, you talk about something, like you have the student in common. So what do you like and care about with the student?
Right.
And I think you're right. We're adults. We know something's not working. We may not know why. We might attribute a lot of meaning to it, but just acknowledging this has not been going well. This is stressing me out. It's probably stressing you out a little bit, unless you like this. I'm assuming you don't. So,
and I'm also a big fan of taking a step back and looking at what is working.
Yeah.
And try to understand what, because it's rare I find that the entire relationship has fallen apart.
Yeah.
Right? So let's look at what are we doing well, and can we build out from that rather than focusing on the thing that's not working?
Yeah.
Is there a way to kind of build the bridge that direction?
Yeah, and having that go in the other direction too. Like, I know that you're a really caring mother. I know that you're not in a patronizing way. Yeah. You're really caring. You've done all your research around this. Not that then the conversation says, just trust me, I'm going to do this. But you're doing this. You have been so involved. I've really seen him progress in these ways. And I know that's because of the things that you're doing. You gave me great information in the last meeting, which helped me shape what I was doing in the classroom. And then, sending it back in the other direction. And it may be hard sometimes if you're really mad at someone to think about one or two things and to be gracious with that. But, hey, I know you're invested. I know you've been trying to do some research around this.
I appreciate that you're showing up.
Yeah, I appreciate
you're doing the work.
Yeah, we're having these hard conversations.
Yeah, no, again, part of that, to extend on what you both were saying, was a common way moving forward for negotiators and mediators in this is to bracket that to the side, and back to something you both talking about, is to find something you do agree on. That to find that one thing that you do agree on, and then that's a pivot point that you can begin to reframe. But it gives you something very solid that you agree on, a space of partnership that you can move forward from.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so one of our participants thanked you and said it was very informative. And another participant shared that they use emails, text, Schoolology, and regular visits to each of the kids' schools, which are really great techniques as well. Before we depart today, I'm going to share my screen again. So Stephanie, our communications person, will post the PowerPoint, but I'm going to show you our contact information, as well as, I would be remiss in not giving you a link to our SurveyMonkey if you want to give us feedback on this webinar and other topics you would like to hear. So we're here to help in any way. We have other webinars posted online. We'll edit this and post it in the next few days. And you can sign up for our newsletter, find us on Facebook. We also have a Spanish Facebook page. We're on Twitter too. Thank you so much to our panelists. And I really appreciate this. Really, it is the start to a conversation. And it was a good start to a conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.